Have you heard about critical race theory?
Critical race theory.
Critical race theory. I came here to talk about critical race theory.
Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to a brand new video. As always, I'm Jesse Hughes. Today, we're going to talk about something that has been circulating the news quite a lot recently. You may have seen it. You may have seen where states are trying to ban it. You may have seen where states are trying to kick it out of their education systems. And you may have seen where people are struggling to try and define it. And you have all sorts of different definitions floating around each and everywhere. And of course, what I'm talking about is critical race theory. Now, the big question on everybody's mind right now is, what is critical race theory and why are people trying to get rid of it? Basically, what critical race theory says is that racism is more than just a product of an individual prejudice. Racism is more than somebody going up and seeing somebody of a different skin color and saying, I don't like you because of your skin color. They believe that racism is actually institutionalized, that it is a part of the fabric of society, especially American society, that racism is built into the foundations of our laws and our legal structure, and that the only way to get rid of racism is to tear all of those down. A big part of CRT also is intersectionality, which is the idea that there are multiple layers of oppression stacked on top of each other. So like, if you're black, that's one layer of oppression, but if you're a black female, that's two different layers of oppression stacked on top of each other. Whereas if you're a black gay female, that's more and more levels of intersectionality and oppression stacked on top of each other until you keep going with all of these different groups that have been historically discriminated against or oppressed over the course of American history. What I want to do is I want to make clear I do not necessarily agree with everything about this theory. Now, there are some parts of it, just like anything else, that you can look at and you can say, I kind of understand where that's coming from, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with it. For example, they say that racism in the United States is institutionalized, and historically speaking, there are instances where that was the case. If you look at from the end of the Civil War all the way up into the 1960s in Southern America, you had Jim Crow laws, which were states declaring segregation through law and making it to where black people and white people had to be segregated. Like if you went to a restaurant, you had a white section and a black section, and sometimes it was a whites only and the blacks would have to eat out back. And so cases like that are actually legitimate cases of racism being enshrined in law. But what they argue is that here, 60 years, 70 years, however many years it's been since the Civil Rights Act, they're trying to say that that stuff still exists in America. And a big issue that I hold with CRT is that a lot, and not all, but a lot of the people who propose it and who use it and who view it through a way that says, because black people are black, or because minorities are minorities, because you're black or Hispanic or whatever, you are inherently, from the day you're born, downtrodden, and you are going to live your entire life in a continual cycle of oppression. Whereas if you're white, all of your successes and fortunes in life are a product of you being white. And if you're black, no matter how successful you are, you're still going to be oppressed, no matter what. And if you're white, you're always going to be the oppressor. Whether or not you actually yourself are racist, the deeds and the things that your ancestors did and the whiteness of your skin is all that matters. And to me, that's an incredibly racist ideology, because on one hand, it blames all of society's ills on one group of people who look a certain way, But also, it says that if you look a different way, you're just doomed. You're doomed to be oppressed your entire life. There's nothing you can do. And obviously, that is, in my opinion, not true whatsoever. And it doesn't take a lot of research to see that these ideas don't hold up when you look at them through the frame of real life. For example, a big tenet of CRT is this idea that whiteness is going to, no matter what, if you're white, you're always going to oppress the minority, and you're always going to be a step above. However, that's not true. A big thing that a lot of people like to point to is that, on average, whites have a higher median income than blacks in the United States. But what they don't point to is people of Asian descent have a higher median income than white people do. What a lot of people also don't want to recognize is that people of Asian descent usually have higher test scores and are more likely to get into places like Harvard, like Yale. However, you may have seen in the news recently, because of this ideology of CRT and because of its firm view of blackness and whiteness, Harvard got into hot water recently because they would purposely lower the test scores of the Asian applicants and take those points and add them to the black applicants, and they would make it to where if somebody, maybe they didn't deserve to be at Harvard, maybe they didn't have the highest test scores, maybe they weren't the best student that could have been placed in that situation, they purposely made it to where we're going to put them in anyway because they're black, and we're going to discriminate against these Asian people. And so that's not a case of white versus black. That's a case of two different minorities in the United States being pitted against one another. And that is a dangerous thing for this country. The divisive nature of CRT is dangerous. And that's why you have a lot of schools and a lot of school boards and a lot of state legislators across the country saying, hey, we don't want this in our schools. And you have a lot of pushback on that, of people saying, oh, you're banning history about racism. That's not what they're doing at all. What they're doing is taking this divisive way of looking at things and saying that has no place in the classroom. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not talking about racism anymore. I didn't even know what critical race theory was until about a year ago. We talked about racism all the time in my high school. I live in deep red state, North Carolina. I live in like the reddest part of the state, and we still talked about racism. We still talked about Jim Crow, and a lot of it we talked about from a more liberal point of view, but that didn't matter. What we didn't do was look at these things and say this was all of a product of white people bad, black people oppressed. That was never a part of the classroom discussion. And now you have people trying to make that a part of the classroom discussion. A big problem with that is that's just going to create, in my opinion, that's just going to create more racial tensions and more racism. Trying to continually divide people on the basis of race is not going to solve these issues and heal these wounds that we have. It's only going to make them worse. Former slave and civil rights leader Booker T. Washington once said this about people who are trying to continually divide people on the basis of race. He said, "There's another class of colored people who make a business of keeping the troubles, the wrongs, and the hardships of the Negro race before the public. Having learned that they are able to make a living out of their troubles, they have grown into the settled habit of advertising their wrongs, partly because they want sympathy and partly because it pays. Some of these people do not want the Negro to lose his grievances because they do not want to lose their jobs." And we see that to a very similar extent. We see that same thing that he's talking about. This was in like the late 1800s, but we see that same thing happening here today with people who are trying to propose critical race theory and say that it should be taught within the classroom environment. And another big pushback that you have of people who are banning from people who say that states shouldn't be banning it is that it's not the state's place. Well, actually, yes, it is. And constitutionally speaking, the state is the one who decides the educational curriculum within the state's boundaries. It is the the state level school board with the state legislator that decides what taxpayer funded institutions are going to teach. And that's important to remember because it does give credence to the idea that states have rights. States can kind of have a little bit of autonomy under the federal government in the system that we have. We live in a federalist society in terms of the way that our government is structured. But a lot of people don't want to focus on that. All they want is for the federal government to make all of the decisions and the states have no say in it whatsoever, which is obviously wrong. Now, if you want to learn more about critical race theory and particularly why it does not make sense, why it's not the best, somebody I'd recommend, he's an amazing, tremendous pastor. His name's Bodhi Baucham. He wrote this book that I've read recently called Fault Lines, one of the best books that I've read in a very long time. He has a very great sermon on YouTube called, Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice. I'll link that here or in the description so you can watch that, and you need to go out and read the book. But basically, to end cap this all, with critical race theory, you have this divisive issue, you have this divisive ideology that says everything is racist.
Everything is racist.
Everyone is racist. And not that everyone is racist, but everyone that's white is racist. Critical race theory has so far plunged itself into our culture. Mainstream dictionaries began changing the definition of racism from simply prejudiced against somebody because of their skin color to having to do with being in a position of power. You have a lot of critical race theorists saying nowadays that black people cannot be racist, that minorities can't be racist because they do not have the power structures in order to oppress other individuals. And obviously, a terrible idea. That's a terrible definition. That is not at all what the ideas or definition that we should follow with critical race theory, but that is what they present to us. That is the idea that they present to us. And obviously, I believe that's wrong. And I would hope that you believe that's wrong as well. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications down below. I hope you guys have an amazing, tremendous day. Thank you again for watching. You guys have a great day. God bless. See you in the next one.